The way we take care of ourselves is ever evolving.
And what we know for sure is that our mind and spirit are linked to our physical body.
And that our wellness seems to extend into our communities and the planet we all share.
It is very, very clear that wellness is interconnected.
We love spending time with you to explore and practice the breakthroughs, the insights, and the passions of incredible people helping us all see the world in a whole new light.
This is Health Gig.
Today's guest is Mary Beth Albright. This is part 2 of our conversation with Mary Beth. If you missed last week's podcast, go on back and listen, and then come on back and join us.
Welcome to Health Gig, Mary Beth.
Thrilled to be here. It's great.
When we go back to talking about eating healthy and not labeling things protein, fiber, whatever, and just eating regularly, how does it help with your emotional well-being? Because there's a lot of stress around eating. I was just with some young people, and they're like, I got to really work on my relationship with food because they're all proteined up or they're all this or that. What would you say?
I talked to one of the counselors at my son's high school. He goes to Episcopal High School in Virginia. Shout out, great school. But one of the counselors at his school is a friend of mine, and I was talking to her, and she said, I agree with you about the eating together thing, but I do see girls, particularly, but it goes everywhere, girls who are eating in groups will often look to one person to see what's acceptable. Is it acceptable to eat dessert today, right? And this is peer pressure. This has been going on forever. I want to make sure that everything that I write about, all the science that I write about, comes with those caveats that if you have a specific condition, you need to, pay attention to your overall emotional well-being.
It was basically kind of about that, like the anxiety around building a plate that's protein and, not talking about it as, oh my gosh, this is the most delicious lentils I've ever had. But rather, oh, wow, lentils are great because they're high in protein and they're high in fiber.
And by the way, they're delicious.
They're delicious. Yeah. But why we don't start out with, I love lentils, I want to make a lentil thing. But rather, it's like, and okay, this is me. I'm looking for the food that's high in both. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love lentils, so we'll do that. But, not like, oh, I love lentils,
So the research that I gathered over the past 20 years, really, 2 decades, supports 4 different branches of how food affects emotional well-being. The first way that I present in the book is through pleasure, because the gut microbiome, there are other books about that. If you want to dive very deep into the gut microbiome, I have an entire chapter on it. I think you're going to find out what you need to know, certainly. But pleasure is what I start with, the importance of food pleasure. So that's the first pillar that I look at. The second one is inflammation. Inflammation anywhere in the body can wreak havoc with emotional well-being, because inflammation produces these tiny little molecules that we used to think the brain was completely protected from what's circulating in the blood by what's called the blood-brain barrier. But now we know, and even just in the past few decades, we know that the blood-brain barrier is not actually a barrier. It's not completely impenetrable, that very small molecules can pass through it. And those inflammatory molecules from inflammation anywhere in our body, if you break your foot, if you scrape your knee, if you get dental work done, anything, any kind of inflammation can make its way through the blood-brain barrier and get to your brain. So that's the second one, is inflammation. And then there are also anti-inflammatory diets. There's all kinds of conversation around that. The third one is the gut microbiome, which we've covered a lot. And the fourth one is nutrients, which we covered a little, which is both macronutrients, those things that our body needs a lot of, and the ones we are most familiar with, protein, carbs, and fat, and micronutrients, which are when we think about vitamins, like vitamin A, B, C, right? Zinc, magnesium. The one that I really focus on in the book is long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, DHA and EPA, because there's a fair amount of research around that, enough that we can say, yeah, there is a link there. There are other nutrients that are being studied that there's science about too, like magnesium and zinc. But it's really all 4 of those together. And you can't pull one of those out because it's like Jenga. The whole thing collapses, All 4 of those are cornerstones. There's not just one cornerstone. If you pull out pleasure, your emotional well-being is going to be in the toilet, right? So you need to look at it that way.
How does the Ozempic craze affect our relationship with food and our well-being?
I was just asked by a major magazine, which I'm very excited about, to submit something about Ozempic, because when I was at South by Southwest, at the end of my presentation, I had a part of it called Listening to Ozempic. Now, do you remember in the late 80s, early 90s, I don't remember the publication date, but there was a book that came out called Listening to Prozac, which was about how this new category of antidepressants, which are SSRIs, which help with serotonin, what it can tell us about the essential nature of the self, right? Like, who are you if you're a totally different person on Prozac? I feel like the same thing is happening with Ozempic, and we need to listen to what Ozempic can tell us. Without being pro or con it, we are starting to get a lot of early numbers that people who are taking Ozempic are not just decreasing calories. We know that, and that's happened with a lot of different things, right? It's happened with gastric bypass surgery or fen-phen or all these things. But it's not just the decrease in that, it's the decrease in the amount of greasy, fatty foods. When I say fatty, I mean like bad fats, right? Again, bad, good, but fats that don't help with your health outcomes. It's not talking about salmon. Decrease in the amount of refined sugar that they eat, but also decrease in the alcohol consumption. Ozempic is being tested right now for conditions like alcoholism, like shopping addiction, with other kinds of things, and then also with other brain-related conditions like Parkinson's and like Alzheimer's. We don't know where that's going. We are so early with Ozempic, but we need to listen to it because we need to look at the fundamental things that it tells us about food pleasure, that it tells us about feeling compelled to eat, and specifically to eat things that don't support our health outcomes. There was a study at the NIH. They're in the process of recruiting more people, but there was a study at the NIH by a scientist named Kevin Hall, who is a really interesting guy and a great follow if you're on any social media platforms. And this is what I was talking about it being so hard to do dietary studies. There were people, I can't remember how many, but it was around 20, who stayed at NIH and lived at NIH for a month. And for that month, everything that they did was tracked. Every morsel of food that went into their mouth. All 4 weeks, they were offered foods of the same amount of calories, fat, macronutrients, micronutrients, that kind of thing. The people who were fed, and one group was given ultra-processed foods for the first 2 weeks, the others whole foods, and then it swapped. When people were offered the exact same items that were made from whole foods, they ate 500 fewer calories than when they were offered those same foods, same amount of calories, same amount of nutrients from ultra-processed food. My favorite example from this is breakfast sandwiches. When people were offered a breakfast sandwich, meat, egg, and cheese, whatever, on bread, or something that was a breakfast sandwich that was like in the freezer section and microwaved and whatever, same amount of calories, same amount of nutrients, people would eat more of the ultra-processed food. So there seems to be something in that compels us to eat more. And again, the goal is not to eat less, but the goal is to make sure that what you're doing is a decision that you're making and not a decision that is happening from somewhere in your brain that something's happening because of these ultra-processed foods. So that's why I think that listening to Ozempic is so critical right now.
Is what you're saying that the idea of taking obesity and it's like when you're obese, it could be like alcoholism. I mean, isn't that what Oprah's saying hers is?
There's a big debate in the medical community about whether you can be, quote unquote, addicted to food, because food is something that you need to consume to live. The debate happens over the fact that there are different ways that our brains light up. You and I could eat the same food, ice cream sundae. If we're in an fMRI and having our brain scanned while we're eating that, different parts of my brain are going to light up than the parts of your brain. And I actually did go through an fMRI. That's in the book too, to do like brain scans while I was eating things. As I said, there are a million things. It's the food memories that we have around that. It's our taste buds, right? There's something called the tongue map of like, how many taste buds do you have? Where are they located? Every little bump on your tongue can have taste buds. Some of them don't. Some of them have hundreds. And so wherever in your mouth they are, you might be sending food to that part of your mouth to get more pleasure out of it. It's like these subconscious things that we have. And the fact that there's a medication that can address those things, those many, many, many factors, is stunning to me. And if we don't learn from it, we're really missing out. If you care about food, you want to learn from this.
Back to omega-3s and DHA and EPA, as you said, that's one supplement that you're like, okay, there are studies done, but that's also a food, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is different than some of the other supplements.
Yeah, to be very clear, the only way that you can get DHA or EPA is from marine sources. There's some debate about this. With all of this, I'm very careful that I only give what the science shows because there's so much hypothetical out there and theory. But the reason that we get DHA and EPA from fish is because the fish eat the algae. They process it within their bodies, and that becomes DHA and EPA, and then we eat the fish. So you can also eat algae, and a lot of times, when you see like DHA and EPA fortified milk in the grocery store, that's usually from algae sources. We don't know if the quality of that is better or worse, right? But we do know that it's very difficult. It's an inefficient process for your body to create a long-chain fatty acid from a short-chain fatty acid. Most of us get plenty of short-chain fatty acids in olive oil, walnuts, that kind of thing. But the DHA and EPA is a specific kind of fatty acid that you really need to go to marine sources for. And so a lot of people, whether you're vegetarian or, you don't like the taste of it or whatever, a lot of people will take omega-3 supplements. And there's also been some research about it affecting heart palpitations. And that's why I'm saying you need to talk to your doctor, and it depends on your specific situation. So I don't want to say go ahead and take an omega-3 supplement, no problem. Talk to your doctor about it. And it is like a pretty efficient way to get DHA and EPA.
The other thing too is that when we talk about bioindividuality, and as you said, each one of us are different, but our bodies change constantly. So how do you address that as we're younger and then now we're older? Like, how does this all work? How does the microbiome affected by all that?
I'm so glad you said that. I mean, that's something that I didn't mention. Your gut microbiome changes every day. I mean, I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday. I'm in Los Angeles today. I'll be in the east end of Long Island next week. And it's like every time that happens, your environment informs what is going on inside of you. So it does change every day, and it does change as we get older, as do our tastes. A lot of times we don't get the same food pleasure out of the same foods, and you need to do things. One of the things I talk about is in Britain, there is a home for retired circus performers, which to me, it's like, I just want to go there and do a documentary on that. But a researcher went there and did an experiment where he fed people pureed foods from their childhood, but piped in music from their childhood as well, and showed photos from that time, and people's food enjoyment increased, even though it was like, these very basic tastes. There's so much going on because, as I always like to say, flavor is created in the brain. There's no inherent flavor in any of the food molecules that we either put on our mouth and taste, or even that we smell. The flavor of food and how satisfying it is created in your brain through a series of all of your senses. What does it look like? Does it look like something that you want to eat? What does it sound like? There's a lot of studies about people who were fed stale chips, potato chips, and they thought they were pretty gross, as predicted, but then they piped in sounds of crunching, and then people's enjoyment of the chips went up. It's called sonic seasoning. And even touch, the way the food hits our tongues, our brains perceive round foods as sweeter. We don't know why, but like when you eat a round piece of chocolate, your brain will perceive it as sweeter than if you eat a square, until your tongue gets it down to a round piece. And that's part of what you're doing in your tongue, right? When you're sucking on a piece of chocolate. So there's so much coming out about this. There's so much we don't know. We will not know about this in my lifetime or my son's lifetime. We will not have all the answers. But boy, is it fascinating to learn about our bodies and to think about it and to have this relationship with food that is based in curiosity, that is based in individualism, rather than based on looking what the other person across from you is eating and deciding whether you're good or bad because you made a different choice. To me, that's the key to emotional well-being.
Can you talk a little bit about cooking and pleasure? You coined a phrase called breaditation, which I thought was kind of fun. Tell us about that.
I'm recording my podcast after this. It's a short, single, solo podcast. I just do like 10 or 15 minutes a week on different things that are coming out, newsy things. It's what I have time for. I think it's what people have time for a lot of times. But the one that I'm doing right now is on food rituals, and that includes cooking and how doing a ritual around food increases our enjoyment of it. And the study that I refer to is two things. Cooking is a separate issue, but people who take a chocolate bar and break it into pieces before eating it report higher food pleasure from eating that chocolate. In the same way that, everybody has a way of eating an Oreo, and it's like if you eat it the other way, it's like just doesn't taste the same, right? Do you twist it apart? Do you put it in milk? Do you just eat it the way it is? Like whatever. And so that is part of it, the food ritual of cooking, but it's also the involvement that you have in creating something. In psychology, there's something called the IKEA effect. That's just general psychology. It's not even food psychology, that when you have a hand in creating something, you value it more. Even if it is not as quote unquote high quality, like you're not creating a restaurant quality meal, you're not making a Italian designed chest of drawers. You're just doing what you can. And it's like, wow, I feel really good about that. The way that I liken it is when you see somebody and you compliment them on their outfit, like, wow, that looks really great. They didn't have to sew that outfit. They just put it together. That's a skill. And I think that assembling food journalists particularly get so wrapped up in like, what is cooking? Are you really cooking that? Like when you're assembling something. And it's like, everybody needs to relax and back off. And just because you didn't sew your outfit doesn't mean that you don't have a great skill putting together that outfit and that you appreciate it and that other people appreciate it. And so that's what I liken it to, because I think that we're very caught up in like, we have to do this and we have to do this. But any little part you can have in preparing your food will increase your enjoyment of it. And gardening, that's another big part of it, like growing your food, although people don't, necessarily. Yeah, absolutely. Going to a farmer's market, all of those things. You guys know this. You can't live in Washington, D.C. and tell other people's secrets ever. So but whenever anybody's like, I need to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone else. And I always say to them, like, first of all, it's in the vault. I haven't lived in the city since 94 by telling other people's secrets. And second, the best moment anyway is right before somebody tells you something, right? That feeling of anticipation of like, oh my God, it could be anything. What's it going to be? And I sort of feel the same way. It's not exactly the same thing with food, but that anticipation is delicious. There's a deliciousness about the anticipation.
If 5 years from now, 7 years from now, 10 years from now, what do you think we're going to be talking about in relation to this?
Ultra-processed foods, and people are already talking about that. And I went and talked to, last summer, I was invited by a food company to go and speak with them and with their science and technology advisory board. And that's what my presentation was about. And I understand that food companies, first of all, they work on such small margins anyway. I am not demonizing food companies. I think about what my subsistence farmer ancestors would do if they walked into a modern grocery store. I mean, that's what they're spending their entire lives doing, is growing food to eat it. And you walk into a place and it's like, oh my gosh, it's just everywhere. And they're handing it out for free. There's like free samples, and there's prepared foods and there's foods that you can cook. So the ultra-processed food industry has to be a part of this. And I'm not saying it like they don't want to be a part of it. They're not evil. They're all humans, and they want their work to contribute to human flourishing. And so it's like, how do we all work together to make sure that we're feeding 8 billion people on the planet and growing, right? But also making sure that we're feeding people in a way that reflects what we value, which is to make sure that individuals and society can all flourish. Very important question about ultra-processed food versus processed food. The problem is, this is why regulation is so devilishly difficult. The problem is that there's no one definition right now. And if you can't define it, you can't regulate it. I mean, it's like the old, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. We don't live in a political world right now that you can start regulating things that you can't even define. There's not enough sort of humanity, goodwill that's around there that we can do that. A system that exists for research purposes is called the NOVA system, which ranks foods in 4 different categories. It goes from minimally processed to highly processed to ultra processed. And to me, I don't even look at the first 3 categories, the like unprocessed, minimally processed, like those categories. It's like focus on category 4, focus on ultra processed foods, which is foods that contain ingredients that are not found in a home kitchen. This is a good definition, but it's not perfect. Because, for example, if you buy the cottage cheese I buy is a probiotic cottage cheese, it's fermented, which is how you get these delicious little bacteria in them. And it says bacterial cultures. Now, I don't use bacterial cultures in my home cooking, right? From that definition, you might be scared off of that. At the same time, you might look at a bag of chips and see that it says corn, salt, and oil and think, great. But the corn is so highly processed and the oil is so highly processed at such high heats to make those like huge batches that are safe for consumption. Chemically, it changes. It's not just the corn that we know, like corn on a cob anymore. And a lot of the times the corn has the fiber stripped out of it. And you don't have to put corn minus the fiber on the ingredients list. You just put corn. That's why I'm saying you can't demonize anyone in this, because everybody's trying to create a good system that is going to be economically viable and contribute to human flourishing. It's really hard. And the question is, how do we do that? So it's not a perfect one, but like, if you're buying a loaf of bread, it is associated with better health outcomes to buy a loaf of freshly baked bread than it is to buy a bread that is in a plastic thing on the shelf and could last for a month in your house because of that processing. I know it's a lot of information. It's a lot. People get my book and they're like, it took me a while to read it. And I'm like, that's fine. There's a lot of information. Yeah.
We all are students of Michael Pollan, right? How much did he influence you?
Michael Pollan is one of the godfathers of all this, but who really influenced me, who sort of got me into this, again, at the turn of the century in the early aughts, was Barbara Kingsolver, the novelist, wrote a nonfiction book called Animal Vegetable Miracle about how she and her family ate only local foods for a year. And at that point, like the sort of local foods thing wasn't really something, right? It was just starting. The whole farm to table thing was just starting. And I'd say that the thing that influenced me the most to devote my entire career to food. I thank her. I love all of her novels. I mean, if you haven't read Demon Copperhead is amazing. I don't know if anybody's read that yet, but I was late to the party. I read it like 2 months ago and it's incredible. But she's an amazing author. Animal Vegetable Miracle is still in print too. She lives in Appalachia, so not so far from Washington, D.C. So if you are on the East Coast, it might particularly be interesting because like right now I'm in Los Angeles, I'm in Pasadena, and it's nirvana. I mean, you can go anywhere and pick something off of a tree, and it's like eating locally in Los Angeles, super easy. Not super easy, but like easier than it is to eat locally in Washington, D.C. in January.
So what's your next book? Do you have one in mind?
Yeah, I've been talking with my publisher. Shout out for Countryman, W.W. Norton. It's an imprint of W.W. Norton, and my editor, who is extraordinary, who I really love. And I've been talking about writing sort of culinary memoir because I grew up in a very chaotic situation. At times I was food insecure, and there are many ways to be food insecure. I should say it was a psychological insecurity. I grew up in a very difficult household, and my father just passed away a year and a half ago. Life was a really interesting journey, and thinking about a lot's happened in the past few years, including I got divorced 6 years ago, which was also a big deal. And so just thinking about that in terms of food and in terms of how we treat forgiveness versus reconciliation, which are two different things. I think forgiveness is for the individual and reconciliation is for the two people who are reconciling. And there is a difference between those things. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to devote a lot of time to that. But there's an updated version. The book is almost 2 years old now, Eat and Flourish. It's coming up July 26th. We're publishing an updated version. You may be able to pre-order that soon or get this one and get the updated version. The updated version is, the conversation about Ozempic, like all of the new science that we've learned. The edition that's available right now is a great foundation. And then getting the updated version July 26th would be great too. Buy them both.
Awesome, exactly. Mary Beth, thank you for being with us. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like this is the best kind of conversation, which really feels like the three of us have been sitting around drinking coffee or tea or whatever.
Exactly.
And just chatting. Yeah. And these are real issues that affect people every single day. We all know about the mental health crisis worldwide. And it's just a tool in the toolbox. And I believe in it. And it's what I'm devoting. I mean, I left the Washington Post a year ago, and I am devoting my career to this now. And so it's really important that I have access like this. So I really appreciate your time.
We're so thrilled you're here. And thank you. You'll have to come back.
Oh, anytime.
Thank you for joining us on Health Gig. We loved having you with us. We hope you'll tune in again next week. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast and follow us on healthgigpod.com. I'm Tricia.
And I'm Doro.
Be well.